return address. She opened it, curious, and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper and stared at a list of names. Matthew Beaumont, Jay Coates, Ethan Dart, Carolyn Geddes, Frank Hopkins, Allison Horn, Arthur Cruz, Jack Radabaugh, Jessica Winslow. She frowned and pressed the sheet of paper flat onto the coffee table, telling herself that she'd show it to Jonathan. A shiver went over her skin, and she shook out her limbs to make it stop. There was something vaguely threatening about receiving a list of names with no explanation. It occurred to her that it just might have something to do with Jonathan. Although she knew relatively little about him, considering the time they spent together, she did know that he had a lot of money. And people who have money usually have enemies. It made her wonder if he would recognize any of the names on the list besides hers. He emerged from the bedroom fully dressed, accepted a glass of wine, then looked at the sheet of paper Allison handed to him. "This mean anything to you?" she asked. He shook his head. "What is it?" "I just got it in the mail." "Was this all?" "Yeah. Strange, huh?" "Strange." He handed the list back to Allison. She asked, "We going to dinner?" "I would if I could, but I got roped into dinner uptown with some hedge fund guys. Sorry, Al." She shrugged. When they'd first begun this relationship 1.5 years ago, she used to make a fuss when he had to leave her. She did it for him mostly, till she realized that he didn't need those kind of reassurances. He was in it for the sex and the company, and she was in it for the money and, she supposed, the sex. Before he left, he gave her a prepaid Visa card, telling her it was an anniversary gift in case she didn't like the scarf. "How much is on it?" she asked. Again, something she would never have asked when they were first together. "I'll let you be surprised. Don't try to buy a car with it, though." After he left, Allison Horn called her best friend, Doug, and asked if he'd like to have dinner that night. On her. 2. Thursday, September 15th, 10:05 a.m. It was the most interesting piece of mail that Arthur Cruz, having just returned from physical therapy, received that morning. He opened the envelope not expecting anything of note, and was surprised to find a short list of names, including his. He didn't recognize any of the other people on the list. There were 3 hours in the day before Arthur was due for his shift as an oncology nurse at Cooley Dickinson Hospital in Northampton. He'd just begun reading A World Lit Only by Fire by William Manchester. Since reading A Distant Mirror over the summer, he'd found he didn't want to leave the Middle Ages. Something about those past lives, the constant suffering, the search for God, acted as the only balm to Arthur's state of mind since the car accident, nearly a year ago, that took the life of his husband, Richard, their cocker spaniel, Misty, and most of the function of Arthur's left leg. He couldn't quite believe it had been a whole year. Joan, his minister, and Arthur's closest friend, told him it would be at least 2 years until he began to feel some semblance of normality, of happiness, of a return to his life. But Arthur wondered. The past endless year felt like it was just going to be repeated ad infinitum. Nothing helped. That wasn't entirely true. Medieval history helped. He gingerly slid into his reading chair and picked up where he'd left off in Manchester's book, not nearly as good as Tuckman's. He read 2 pages, then drifted off, waking an hour before he had to be at the hospital. His leg was always at its worst after midday napping, and he found himself limping to the kitchen to put on hot water for a cup of tea. While waiting for the water to boil, he looked out the window over his sink and caught a glimpse of the fox, the one he'd named Renard, skirting the edge of his property. It was moving fast, and just before it ducked into the trees, it turned its head, and Arthur thought he saw something, a small rodent, maybe, in its jaws. It inexplicably made Arthur happy for the moment. The last time he'd seen Renard, he'd been worried about how skinny and ragged he looked. The day was overcast, and the willow tree down by the brook had just begun to exhibit a yellowish cast. He drank the tea at his computer and thought of the list he'd gotten in the mail. What had it meant? Some strange automatic mailing, a computer screwing up somewhere in the middle of the country and sending out some random names. It was a possibility. Ever since Richard's passing.